Welcome back to the We Who Thirst podcast, where Jesus is the living water and it is we who thirst. You can support this ministry by joining our Patreon. Our current series is Women in Context, a deep dive into the lives and stories of the women of the Bible in their cultural, familial, and historical context. Welcome back. Today we are taking a break from our Women in Context discussions to talk with Joan Taylor about her study of Jesus in context. Joan Taylor is the author of many books on ancient religion, history, and archaeology. She is a New Zealander of Anglo-Danish heritage and is the Professor Emerita of Christian Origins and Second Temple Judaism at King's College, London. Joan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and especially what got you interested in New Testament study?
Well, that is a very big question in that I guess I was brought up in a Christian family and went to Sunday school, went to church, and during my teenage years got fascinated as I was actually the confirmation experience at my Methodist church that I was going to in Lower Hutt in New Zealand. The minister there was really right on in terms of inquiry. And that got me interested and knowledgeable about the fact that books had been written about how to interpret the Bible and the history. And that really set me off. But I traveled to Israel, Palestine in my early 20s and roamed around there, went to a lot of archaeological sites, went to museums. All of these things feed into an interest. And
it when really does.
New Zealand, I was like, this is what I need to study.
Yes, I relate. Yes, I know from being in Israel myself, I spent 9 months there, that once you're there, you just can't get it out of your blood. You're like, I just have to keep learning all about this forever.
Absolutely.
So Joan, I've been reading through your newest book, which is titled Boy Jesus, and we'll get back to that. But I know you've written quite a few other books as well. Can you tell us some of the books that you've written?
Oh, all kinds of different things. I have written on John the Baptist. That was one of my earliest ones, the Immerser, John the Baptist in Second Temple Judaism. And that really got me into looking at a figure of the New Testament within the context of his time and thinking about how he would have appeared at that time. And I have written quite a bit on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the context for the Dead Sea Scrolls, the groups like, the Essenes, who are normally considered those responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this really weird group over in Alexandria called the Therapeutai, who were contemporaries of Jesus and early Christianity. And we're doing something quite different over there in Alexandria in Egypt. So I've written about Philo of Alexandria, who was also contemporary and had his own particular ideas, philosophical Jewish ideas. So I roam into all of these different nooks and crannies really whenever I'm interested. But I also write and have written quite a bit over the years on women and gender issues in the New Testament and in the early church and also in Judaism. I was particularly interested in the women Therapeutai, for example.
Yes.
So, trying to understand what it was like for women around Jesus. I wrote a book with Helen Bond, Women Remembered, Jesus' Female Disciples.
And, I saw that.
And we also did a documentary that is out there on YouTube. Anyone can look at it.
Oh, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, the new evidence for Jesus' female disciples. Some new evidence for Jesus' female disciples and really how they were remembered in the early church.
Oh, I haven't found that yet, so I will definitely look that up. That sounds fascinating. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anybody else who's listening that's like, I want to look at that too. So I will find that and put a link on the social media posts and in the show notes of this episode.
Thank you. Wonderful.
So when I was looking through, I just did a search for Joan Taylor, was looking at several of the books you did. Women Remembered was one of the first ones I noticed. I was like, okay, we're going to talk about Boy Jesus, which is amazing. But can you just tell us a little bit about what Women Remembered is about and what you did in that book?
Yeah, it did spring from our documentary, and with the documentary, we pitched the idea to a television production company, which is quite unusual for scholars. Normally, TV production people come to you and go, "We want you to say these things in as short a time as possible." And Helen and I had done quite a bit of documentary work, and we thought we can do a documentary, and we pitched it, and it was picked up by these people at Minerva Media, and we made it. We were on the road doing a lot of talking while we were making the documentary, and we focused on certain women who were disciples of Jesus, of course, Mary Magdalene.
Yes.
But also Salome, who is a rather mysterious figure, and the figures mentioned in the Gospel of Luke, like Joanna, who was wife of Chusa, Herod's steward, mystery.
Yes.
And sat in the theater at Tiberias and just brainstormed on what her life was like. And because we were doing a lot of brainstorming, which wasn't all picked up by the documentary, we just had so much time to talk.
Right.
We thought, okay, we need to do this book where we go into what we can possibly know about these named figures, but also what we might know about some of the unnamed figures who were clearly Jesus' disciples, like the woman with the issue of blood. She's not named in the Gospels. She's remembered as being called Berenike, but she's not named. But clearly she was telling her story.
Yes.
Because there's no way you would have known about her experience unless she had told that story. So that idea of women telling stories to other women was one of the things that was a thread through our book. And just really pointing out that our texts shine the light on the guys. They're interested in the men. They're not interested in the women. It's a man's world. But that doesn't mean historically there weren't important women. And we know from the resurrection accounts that women were absolutely everything in terms of what was going on there. So that's the book in a nutshell.
I love that. So I noticed a few of your other books that you've written as well, and I cannot wait to buy Women Remembered. I'm going to get that as soon as possible. But I noticed you've also written a book on what Jesus looked like. You've written books on Christians in the holy places, which that one seemed very scholarly. But I just wanted to pick your brain briefly on that because I've traveled to Israel, and there's all the holy sites in Israel. And what the people I was there with mentioned that many of those may not be actually accurate. Like they say, this is the church of the fish and the loaves. But are the holy sites in Israel accurate to where those events actually happened?
Yeah, some of them are. And I think, for example, that the Gethsemane cave, not the Garden of Gethsemane, but the Gethsemane cave is recorded very early on in terms of Christian tradition as the place where it all happened. And that idea of it being a cave fits in with our gospel accounts. And I've written about that Jesus leaves somewhere and comes back somewhere, and they're all sheltered in the very cold night, the night he was arrested. So that makes sense. But then we've got to remember that some sites were revealed to people in dreams. Like, for example, it's not in the book, but the cave of John the Baptist on the eastern side of the Jordan River. The story is that there was a monk who spent the night in a cave, and John the Baptist appeared to him in a dream and said, "This is a very important cave. Pay attention to it." And then it was considered to be the cave where John lived, and it attracted a lot of pilgrims. So with any given holy site, you don't know really whether there's a firm tradition behind them or whether it's been revealed, because in the Byzantine period, that idea that you would get an angel or a saint
Right.
telling you these are my bones, or
Right.
this is a really important place. That was really important for them. That direct revelation, heavenly revelation, was really more important than anyone saying, "Oh, we can trace a memory all the way back." That it really, they valued that. So when we come along, we had to do all of the critical thinking and think, okay, where does it belong in terms of tradition, and when did people first start coming here?
Yes, our values and our ways of measuring knowledge are different now than back then. We have a different approach.
Which is not to say, wonderful things can be, there could be wonderful things revealed in dreams and visions.
Absolutely.
But to be really forensic and scientific, we want to know what the earliest stuff is.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your newest book, Boy Jesus. What prompted you to do such a deep research into Jesus' childhood?
I think there's a whole lot of different things. It's partly just being a mum, and thinking about how important childhood is, wanting to, being aware of the experiences of my children and how that has shaped them, and also being aware of the experiences that have shaped me, and also my mother. Frankly, my mum, her childhood was quite traumatic. She was, you mentioned me being Anglo-Danish. Mum is Danish.
Okay.
And she's very elderly now, but she was in occupied Copenhagen when during the Second World War, and she has experiences that then were passed on to me, and I can emotionally live through my mother in terms of the traumatic experiences she had during that time. And I thought about, okay, Jesus, a child Jesus, we have these accounts, these nativity accounts, and both nativity accounts indicate trauma of some kind and displacement of some kind. And it made me think, so what is that? What is going on here? And I wanted to then sort of think more about the historical context and place Jesus' childhood within that historical context, even if we are really, really doubtful about the nativity accounts, and a lot of my colleagues in historical studies are. I thought, okay, the least we can do is put Jesus in his time as a child.
Yeah. And that, I found that to be really profound in the book. I have a master's in Israel studies, so I've learned some of this, but people who have not done even the little bit of study I've done are often completely unaware of the historical context and everything that's going on socially and politically during that time period. Can you just give us a high-level overview of what's going on in that time period, the revolts, the turmoil, and all of that, just so that my audience can start to understand this picture?
Yeah, no, it's big. It's a huge amount of stuff going on.
And you outline it really well in the book.
We try and boil it down. We know in the nativity accounts there is bad King Herod, and he sort of turns up as a pantomime villain, bad, boo. But that actually relied on the audience having an experience of King Herod, which was negative.
Right.
And there were very many reasons for that. So that the big picture is that the Romans had come in and really wanted to install their people in charge of Judea. So 63 BCE, Pompey comes in and goes into Jerusalem and takes over. And then the Romans take control, and they rule via client rulers wherever they take control. So Herod is a Roman client king. He's in the pay of Rome, and he has to do everything right by Rome. He had trouble initially taking charge. great enemy of Rome, the Parthians. You think modern Iran, it's the same area. The Parthians wanted their guy in Judea. They pushed back. Herod pushed back with the army of Mark Antony and got control. It's all very Roman stuff. And then Herod really wanted to keep that control. What the Romans wanted was everything to be peaceful, meaning they could harness as much taxation from these sorts of places as possible. They could have a lot of honor, temples built for the Roman emperor, and Herod built imperial cult temples so that the Roman emperor would be worshipped in Judea. So he was Rome's man, and part of being Rome's man was to quash any even slight smidgen of revolt. And the way Herod interpreted that as anything that would impact detrimentally on his own rule, because he was placed there by Rome, believed he was placed there by God, he was ruler of Judea. And so he was mercilessly cruel and ended up killing 3 of his own sons and his wife, Mariamne, all sorts of other people, members of the royal household, servants, anyone who showed any sign of revolt. And just before Jesus, sort of around the time Jesus was born, there were all kinds of pushbacks against Herod, and Herod became increasingly horrible.
One thing that jumped out to me as I was reading the book is talking about Herod and how he, a little bit before Jesus was born, had killed young men from the region of Bethlehem and then built what became his tomb later within eyesight of Bethlehem. And so that was fascinating to me to fill out the context a little bit more.
No, I mean, it's visually on the horizon. If you go to Bethlehem today, if you can get up on the roof of a building and look towards the south, you will see Herod's tomb. It's reconstructed on the side, much, much smaller than it actually was. He built that overlooking Bethlehem. He built a palace fortress overlooking Bethlehem. It was called Herodion, and it's to commemorate the site of a massacre of the local inhabitants that he had managed to see off after they attacked him. So what had happened was these Parthians had installed their man, Mattathias Antigonus, on the throne of Judea. Herod had fled from Jerusalem, fled south past Bethlehem. The local people who hated Herod went out, the guys from Bethlehem and the surrounding villages went out and tried to attack him as he was fleeing. And he managed with his own armed guard to defeat them and totally slaughter them. But there was a memory of a massacre of young men in the Bethlehem psyche. And that's what I think is so interesting in terms of the massacre of the innocents that we have in the Gospel of Matthew, where Herod massacres small babies or boys. That there is this resonance of what had happened in 40 BCE. It's completely chronologically displaced. But sometimes with memory, that happens. That some of the details change, the dates change as time goes on. But the actual event that Herod massacres people in the Bethlehem area is actually historically shown. And it's shown in the writings of this Jewish historian Josephus, who had the court records of Herod's chronicler, Nicolaus of Damascus. So it's not like he's dreamt it up. He's actually got the chronicles of the Herodian court.
And so we see, as we read the nativity accounts of Matthew and Luke, we see how there's this underlying trauma that the people in this region carry that was
precipitated on them by Herod himself, with visible reminders on their skyline every single day. And this is part of the context and that the birth of Jesus is coming into.
Exactly. And that sense of the bad Roman client rulers, the rich and the mighty, the ones that have this power and incredible wealth in comparison to ordinary people.
Absolutely. And you get this class tension as well between the rich and the poor, as you said. Talk to us a little bit. Can you unpack the significance of being a son of David? Bethlehem is the city of David. Jesus is the son of David. What is significant about that for Jesus personally in his identity?
Yeah, so again, it's one of those things in terms of my colleagues in historical Jesus studies were doubtful about Jesus actually being the son of David at all, because there's been this kind of Western European American, North American idea that, oh, well, you couldn't really remember your genealogy over all of these generations. But coming from New Zealand, I see the Indigenous people of New Zealand, the Māori, remembering their genealogy, and it's hugely important across centuries and centuries. And so this idea that you can't remember your genealogy and recite it, this is, we get trapped into certain ways of thinking. But people also doubted that anyone could remember they were a descendant of David at the time, and there wasn't much written about that. But I found two pieces of evidence that I thought were really important, and one was a little ossuary bone box inscription in which someone is buried, and on the bone box it's of the house of David. So that person is identifying as coming from the Davidic line. And also in the Mishnah, there's even a job description, the Mishnah, early Jewish writing, for the descendants of David who have to take wood to the altar of Jerusalem. So there were descendants of David around, and you would expect them to be in the ancestral town of David, which is so Herod actually building his fortress palace tomb overlooking Bethlehem is also this idea of Bethlehem being a place where descendants of David lived, and if you were a descendant of David, you had a lot of hope attached to you, because there were predictions that there would be someone from the line of David who would return to the throne of Israel. Micah chapter 5 even talks about Bethlehem as the place that this future king, the Messiah, the anointed one, is going to come. So if you were from that line of David, and you had these scriptural predictions that someone from the line of David would rise to liberate and lead Israel, that would be a weight on your shoulders. There would be a sense of, okay, someone from our family is supposed to lead Israel. What does that mean? What does that mean? And actually, I think that what we have in the Gospels is a kind of working out of what it really meant to be a son of David for Jesus. There's expectation, there's prophecy, but what does it really mean? Does it mean being a great warrior and riding your horse and getting an army together and liberating Jerusalem, only to get clobbered by the Romans? Or does it mean something different? How can you think outside the box?
Right. Because so many of the messianic type figures or rebel leaders that rose up during that time period were purely military.
Entirely.
And so Jesus was a complete contrast to what people were expecting.
Absolutely.
During this time period, there's a lot of violence and revolts and wars between the Jewish people and the rulers. Was there specific political aggression against the House of David in particular during this time period?
Herod particularly moved against the memory of David to start off with. There was the tomb of David remembered in the middle of Jerusalem. It was quite a major monument in Jerusalem. It's referred to in the Acts of the Apostles. David's tomb was in the city. And he went into the tomb in the middle of the night with a bunch of his closest associates and took the treasure out of the tomb. So that's a tomb desecration. That's a tomb robbery. And it wasn't said that it was done for any great reason other than he wanted the money. And he went in, according to Josephus, he went into the deepest part of this tomb, and actually some weird thing happened, and that fire burst out when he entered this deep recess, which I think is kind of curious because it's almost like there was a gas which you can have in tombs that have been ignited by the torches that they brought into the tomb. So I find that quite plausible. But it shocked Herod, and he then built a propitiatory monument, a kind of saying sorry monument outside the tomb. But it was remembered that Herod had done this. And as time goes by, we get memories of early Christian scholars who say that Jesus' family, who are also descended from David, were targeted by the Romans. So Jesus' family, I think, one of what I really wanted to do in the book is place Jesus within a family. So he's not just a lone figure.
Right.
And not, or sometimes you see Jesus with his mother, of course, but it's not as if he's presented within a wider family circle. And I think that everyone grows up within we grow up within families and this is important, and they shape us. Well, the family of Jesus took over the control of the Judean churches after he was no longer around. His brother James was in charge of the church in Jerusalem until 62. It goes on through other family members. The last family member is Simeon, who is executed by the Romans as a descendant of David and a Christian. The grandsons of his brother Jude were interrogated by the Romans as possibly being able to lead an army. They were descended from David. The Emperor Vespasian, apparently, according to Hegesippus, another Christian writer, tried to wipe out all of the descendants of David. So the Romans knew there was this prediction of the Messiah from the line of David, and they wanted to get rid of all of them. So again, that ties in with the massacre of the infants.
And was the Romans trying to get rid of the line of David? Was that before Jesus was born? So he would have been growing up with that tension, or was that after his life and death and resurrection?
It's attested. I mean, Herod's desecration of the tomb was 10 BCE, and normally Jesus is understood to have been born around, and very confusingly, I say BCE, 6 BCE, 6th BC. So Jesus was born 6 years before Christ. This is the peculiarity of our chronological system.
Right.
So we tend to say BCE as before Common Era, so it doesn't sound absolutely crazy. But he was born in the last years of Herod the Great, and that is clear from the nativity accounts. And also to make sense of the fact that he was around 30 years of age when he comes to John the Baptist in the year 28 in the 14th year of the Emperor Tiberius. So it does all work out. But those final years of Herod, only a few years before he desecrated the tomb of David, and clearly with the blessing of the Romans, because they didn't want anyone from the line of David coming up to cause a problem in Judea.
Okay, so Jesus is growing up in a time of great political turmoil. We have violent revolts happening. Herod is massacring people. So he is born in Bethlehem. They flee to Egypt. Talk to us about what's going on when Joseph brings the family back from Egypt. The political situation has shifted because Herod the Great died. So what is going on with Archelaus and the other Herod in Galilee? What's the situation there?
Well, it's the complete mayhem at the time of Herod's death. Herod, just before he died, had done the most horrific thing, which is he had burnt alive the students of a particular couple of teachers in Jerusalem who had torn down the Roman golden eagle from the front of the temple. So it was a very anti-Roman gesture.
Yeah.
And all sorts of abominations that he was doing happened. And then he dies, and everyone's a bit traumatized, after all of these terrible things.
Right.
And the question is, who is his heir? And whoever is the heir has to then be approved by Rome. And so there's this instability. At that point, a number of revolutionary leaders, you mentioned before, rise up and try and take back Judea as an independent area.
And so all of this is going on kind of, if we just try to keep the biblical timeline, while Jesus and Joseph and his family are in Egypt, all of this instability is happening in Judah, Palestine, Israel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Instability in terms of a liberation movement with various different forms happening. And one of the things that happen is a revolutionary leader called Judas takes the capital of Galilee, Sepphoris, which is just down the road from Nazareth, and creates an independent area in Galilee. So that's very important in terms of the background for the Gospel of Matthew, because what we have is Joseph feeling, getting a message that he can return because the people that were the great threat have gone. That's Herod and people associated with Herod. But then it says when he heard that Archelaus was ruler of Judea, he goes to Galilee. Well, that's very interesting, because what happens in Judea, in Jerusalem, is that Archelaus kind of takes control. He still needs to be given the okay by Rome, but he takes control. But what has happened is huge numbers of people have encamped in the temple demanding liberation, that they can have an independent state. And he tries to take control of the situation and ends up massacring thousands of people in the Jerusalem temple. So it's a horrific bloodbath. And Archelaus is then proven to be no better than his father, in fact, probably worse in various different ways.
Didn't you say in the book he crucified like 2,000 people right outside Jerusalem in that area?
That's right. Well, it's the Roman legate from Antioch, Varus, who comes down in support of Archelaus. And it's remembered as this war of Varus, this enormous onslaught by the Romans. You never messed with the Romans. No. You never won. The Romans came down from Syria with a huge army, including Nabateans and all sorts of other client rulers who came in and joined them, and they just went through, and they actually defeated Judas in Galilee and the city of Sepphoris, and enslaved the entire population as Romans did. And they went down to Jerusalem and just annihilated all of the opposition and cruelly executed, crucified people. And people fled to the Judean wilderness. They were hunted down there. They didn't want to leave anyone alive who had revolted against them. So that incredible cruelty. And so what I think of Joseph taking his family back from Egypt. They think they're going home to Bethlehem. They veer off, as it says in the Gospel of Matthew, from Judea to Galilee, where there's a bit of respite. There isn't a Roman client king in charge at that time.
Right.
Only to have Varus's armies arrive and torch Sepphoris. And from Nazareth, you would have gone up on the hill behind Nazareth and be able to see Sepphoris burn. And I think okay, little boy Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
the smoke of burning Sepphoris.
Mm.
I remember myself, a personal story, when I was a child, a house burnt down the end of our road. And I remember I would only have been about 3.
Okay.
I remember crying. I sat on the sidewalk outside our house and cried. And I remember my mother picking me up and saying, "Oh, come inside." And for a child to see terrible destruction has a
Yes.
huge impact on you.
Mm-hmm. And this, I feel like, trying to choose my words, thinking about Jesus' childhood as a mother in the context. Herod brutalizes the people of Bethlehem, builds the Herodian right outside where they can see it. So that's about 30 years before Jesus is born. Jesus is born in Bethlehem. They're afraid of Herod. They flee to Egypt. Joseph is told to come back once Herod the Great dies. He's like, I don't want to deal with Archelaus in Judea because he's just as bad. I'm going to go up to Nazareth, where right now you described there's a kind of a little pocket of Judean control. We're going to go to Nazareth. We'll be safe. We're from the line of David. We're already, as our family, in a precarious position. They get to Nazareth only to have the Roman army come through, and the city they can see from where they're living gets burned, and Jesus could have watched that as a little boy.
Exactly. It's huge.
So you have
all of this is, in terms of impact, it's not said, but it's hinted at. If you just put Jesus in the context of the times, that is actually what happened.
And so his entire ministry as an adult is he's ministering in and to a people group that is fundamentally and profoundly traumatized. Mm-hmm. His entire ministry is reaching to the poor, lower class groups that have been absolutely brutalized and traumatized by the ruling powers. So it's not just, we don't prefer Rome, we'd rather be free. They have been completely traumatized, and his entire ministry is in some ways giving people hope in the middle of their intense trauma, which he experienced alongside them as a child.
Absolutely. And I think that he turns things around. So instead of thinking of liberation in terms of a military way, he's thinking of a kind of new way of being, a new way of operating. So, I want to explore that more in the next book that I'm writing. Jesus,
can't wait.
But just, in terms of what the trauma has meant personally to Jesus, I think when he sends out his apostles, when he sends out the 12 to the villages of Galilee, he asks them to go out to a village without anything, without a change of clothing, without extra clothing, without food, without any money in their belts. They can have sandals, they can have a walking stick, but they basically arrive in a village looking like poor refugees, not trying to be anything, not trying to look fancy. They're not arriving in suits and looking like they have it all. They're looking the very opposite. So it sort of turns everything around. And he indicates that anyone who doesn't welcome such people, well, that's what's going to invite God's justice ultimately. It's what you give, you get kind of thing. And so he embraces in some way the model of being hit by the world in a way. He goes, well, God is on the side of those who have suffered. God is on the side of the downtrodden and the poor and the marginalized, actually. And if God is on your side, actually, that's mightier than the Roman emperor.
Wow.
And it's strengthening you. against the claims of Rome.
And so that in his teachings would have had a profound impact on the groups who were trying to align themselves with Rome religiously. The Sadducees, the Pharisees didn't love Rome, but they still had a bit more power and class than the average people did.
Yeah.
And so Jesus' message to this incredibly traumatized group would have automatically pitted him against those trying to seek their own welfare by aligning themselves with Rome.
Absolutely. And a lot of the things he says about the rich and the mighty, behind that is the sense that you are rich and mighty in a world that is aligning itself with Rome, that you are benefiting somehow from the present world order. In the temptation narrative, when Jesus meets Satan in the wilderness, Satan basically tempts Jesus with saying, look, you can have all of this. You can be emperor. You can be world emperor. And Jesus just pushes right back at that.
Oh, wow.
It's the absolute opposite of what God is about.
Which in this context is profound, because people are expecting, they're looking for a military Messiah to be ruler, king over Judah, Israel, and maybe even more of the world. And Satan offers that. And Jesus is like, that's not the way this kingdom works.
Yeah, I came to serve, not be served.
Oh, it completely shifts everything. Wow. Talk to us a little bit more about Nazareth when he was a boy. We often think about Nazareth as kind of this idyllic picture, as a quiet backwater, nowhere town where Jesus is just kind of growing up, running on the hills and playing, and he's a simple peasant boy. It's a quiet, unassuming life in this little tiny nowhere town. How much of that matches what we know of Nazareth and Galilee in this time period?
Yeah, Nazareth, we don't know how big Nazareth was because very little archaeological excavation has taken place in Nazareth. But we know that Galilee generally was very densely populated. There were a lot of villages very close by. So it's not like Jesus, when walking around Galilee, would have gone very far before hitting another village. And that's been shown by many archaeological surveys. And this dense population, things like various different diseases would have been rife. There would have been high infant mortality. There seems to have been, even within, we can see it in Jesus' own teaching, a lot of poverty, day laborers going out to work in the fields and just being ready for hire. The lands were largely controlled by rich landowners. So this is the wealth and the poverty. There was a certain amount of village land and, poor farmers as well. But there were these, there would have been Roman-style villas where there were wealthy landowners. And they also feature in Jesus' parables. That he reflects the time in terms of what he presents there. And this bubbling of discontent. Josephus talks about the Galileans as being rather macho warrior guys. They were wanting to kind of fight. And the message of Judas, who got thoroughly defeated, was percolating all along, and actually then erupted in the 60s when the Judean the Great Revolt happened, when the Judeans, spearheaded by the Galileans, in fact, revolted against Rome. So all of that, was under the surface. There was banditry, bandit caves, sort of. If you think about the ancient world, there's no police in the ancient world. And there's a lot of crime. So it's not a safe environment. You rely on your village community to support you. I think that one of the things that I noticed was how Josephus, when he became a leader of the revolt himself before he switched sides in the 60s, he very quickly assembled a huge Galilean army. And And so he knew about what Galileans were like. And I think, okay, if they were this kind of warrior style people, then Jesus would probably have been learning to fight like other boys in his village. Learning to fight in many cultures is just what you grow up with. So I think sometimes we think about Jesus, learning carpentry or going to the synagogue school and learning Bible and all of these things, and it being quite peaceful. But I think about him also having to learn how to fight, wield a knife.
Yeah. We don't think of Jesus being scrappy and ready to battle and then choosing to go the complete opposite way.
Exactly. So again, turn the other cheek. If someone asks you to walk 1 mile, go with them too. That sense of we're consciously going to push back at you by doing something you don't expect, you being the attacker in this situation.
Right.
So it's not passive, it's an act of turning things around and witnessing to someone who would otherwise be violent towards you.
Wow. And then these themes of marginalization and displacement in the Gospels, how were they important for the early church? Because the Gospels were written after the Great Revolt in 60, 70 AD, where Jerusalem was destroyed. The Gospels are written after that. Am I correct?
Absolutely. The first gospel, the Gospel of Mark, is probably written shortly after 70, when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans.
And so these themes that are all through the Gospels and all through Jesus' early life would have been incredibly important for the early church. How would that have brought hope and comfort to the early church?
That's a big question, and I sort of have to think about it. Hope and comfort. I think in a culture where clubs and societies could be banned very, very quickly by the Romans. This is the Roman world, and there are spies everywhere, and anyone who has any kind of whiff of objection to what the Roman imperial family is saying is a traitor and treasonous, and you die. There would have been hope and comfort, but there's also a preparedness to take the consequences. Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to follow me has to take up their cross, and follow me. And they were prepared to die, and in fact they did in the persecution by Nero in Rome after the fire of Rome in 64. That's probably when both Peter and Paul were killed. So that sense of don't expect the world to look after you, actually, because the world has gone wrong, and trust in God and the right way of following Jesus and his teaching. But this is not about making a safe place for yourself in the world. Your hope and comfort really comes with a faith in something much deeper and more meaningful about what life is about.
So, Joan, for you personally, as we wrap things up, studying Jesus, studying him in context, studying his childhood, for you personally, how does that impact your walk with Jesus, your personal faith?
It does all the time. I feel I learn all the time as I go into the past. I often feel like Jesus set such an incredibly high bar in terms of a model. If you think of him as, I'm a Quaker and part of the Society of Friends, and it's a sense of you look to Jesus as an ethical model and a guide and a support, but he's so far out in the distance in terms of what we can achieve, but still setting his moral standard, seeing him create that moral standard is really, really important. And discerning it and being true to it as much as we can in our own feeble way, I think is very important for me. And that's why I think it is important also to be part of a faith community, whatever faith community feels comfortable for you, because we need each other. We're not just single people out in the world, we're not just little islands. We need to be clustered together and support each other.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joan, for coming and sharing with us about all of your writings and your wisdom. For those who are listening, you can get her Boy Jesus book now. It came out March 11th. She does an excellent job in Boy Jesus walking through the scholarship and the background. There's so much more in the book than we can get to in our brief conversation today. But I will put in the social media posts all of her books, not all of her books because she has a lot, but I'll highlight a few of her books that are available, as well as Boy Jesus. Joan, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us about this. And I personally can't wait to dive into some of your other resources as well.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here and I appreciate your questions.
Thank you so much. I've been really blessed by this conversation. I'm going to be pondering on a lot of the themes that we've brought up in this conversation for a long time. And I think it's going to help me personally really, as I interpret the Gospels, and think about the overall context, especially how Jesus is ministering in the face of trauma and PTSD symptoms constantly. Trauma and PTSD is the cultural context in which Jesus' entire ministry is taking place. And so that's just one of the many things I'm going to be chewing on as I come back to the texts of Scripture after engaging with you and reading your work. So I am so thankful for you and for your work, and I cannot wait to read more.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
You're so welcome. Well, I'm going to close us off now, and one of our next episodes, we will be returning to women of the Bible in their historical context. So when I return to the We Who Thirst podcast next, that is what we will be going back to. Thank you all for tuning in and listening, and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the We Who Thirst podcast. A complete bibliography of the research behind this episode is available at wewhothirst.com. If you would like the full show notes, an opportunity to discuss each episode in a safe Discord chat, or simply to support this ministry, visit our Patreon. I am so thankful and am honored to have had you here with me for this episode. Until next time, remember, Jesus is the living water, and it is we who thirst.